also to help educate folks who may not always understand the Holocaust or the implications it's had on our society today. Please continue to feel free to have some snacks during this event. Also, for those who are wondering, the restrooms, if you go out these doors and make a right, you'll see the sign for the bathroom if you need to use the restroom. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome our campus president, Dr. Remembrance Stewart, up to give a few words of welcome.
Certainly, thank you so much, Scott, and good evening or good afternoon to everyone. I'm so happy to see each one of you here at WVU Tech. This is my second time to have the opportunity to join you for this solemn occasion. Last year, when I learned more about Yom HaShoah, I called a rabbi. In Baltimore, Maryland. He gave me some of the details behind this why. And it's so unfortunate as we oftentimes talk about the Holocaust or talk about the atrocities that we witnessed in the past. I'm not for sure we in the present have a full understanding of what that truly means. And when you think about the millions of people just like those of us in this room right now, who were sent to an untimely death because of selfish individuals that saw no need to preserve the sanctity of life. Ladies and gentlemen, as we sit here and we remember those lives lost. We remember the blood that was shed, the sweat and the tears that streamed down the faces of the millions of people that were tragically killed. We must be alert and aware today that these types of things can happen. These types of things do happen, especially if we, as champions of justice, champions of peace, champions of equality, sit back and remain quiet. And so today is not only an opportunity for us to reflect on the past, but most importantly, it's an opportunity for us to understand the present, and each one of us make that commitment to ensure that the horrors of the past are never repeated today. And so on behalf of the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of Tech, I want to thank you for not only joining us as brothers and sisters, but most importantly, I want to thank you for remembering to. Welcome.
I want to introduce my buddy over here. This is Rabbi David Sofian, who comes to us at this time of year for both services and to help participate. For over 20 years, maybe 23, 24 years ago, Max Lewin began our congregational observance of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance. Max's picture is here. We will have a little presentation about his story, but he was a man who lost all his family in the Holocaust, and he was a survivor of the concentration camps. He stands for us as a personification, if you will, of all those who died and went through the concentration camps and suffered the persecutions of the Holocaust. Sam Weinstein will be reading his story in just a little bit. Educating about the Holocaust and education about all genocides and almost genocides are important because they still occur today. They occurred before the Nazi Holocaust. Max suffered during the Holocaust, but he also suffered afterwards, because all survivors and their family members who do survive suffer with the memory and the experience After the presentation on his story and his family, we'll transition to a presentation that I'll be giving that's entitled Seeds of Persecution, Seeds of Genocide. This presentation that I'm giving is my own opinion and does not represent the thoughts or opinions of any organized group or others. But I feel that my obligation is to continue the education and to make this presentation. We hope that by being here, all of us can recognize what leads up to Holocaust, what leads up to genocides. Hopefully we become the canaries in the coal mine, among warning others when things in our day, today, and in the future may happen, and call forth our concerns and our protests about circumstances that then can go on to persecution and to genocide.
The Jewish community is nearly entirely about memory. Next week we will observe Passover, in which we remember the story of our liberation from Egypt, and we ponder its meaning. Yom HaShoah, in which we remember the Holocaust, a more recent sad memory, but virtually all of Jewish life is about memory. That memory has never been more important, I would say, for the Jewish community than in the last several months, and particularly in the last several hours. So I thought we would begin this afternoon from a tradition in Jewish life in which we offer a prayer, but the prayer doesn't have any words. It only has melody. And that means that each one of us can fill that melody with whatever the thoughts and hopes, prayers of our own hearts are. So we can all join together in the melody, even as each of us expresses ourselves individually, internally. The melody is very simple. It has two parts. Let me do each part. Hopefully you'll join with me, because otherwise you will be afflicted to just listen to me. Lai, la, lai, 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 lai. Yai, la, lai, 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 lai. Yai, la, lai, lai. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. That's the first part. You want to try?
Yes.
Lai, la, la.
Tim Arnstein, who will give us Max Lewin's story.
For you that are asking why is she doing this, my guess is because I knew Max longer than anybody. My first memory of Max was in 1957. I was working at Harry's Men's Store, and I wrapped packages for Christmas. And this short little man, not that I can call anybody short, would come shuffling in. He really never looked you in the eye. Sometimes he'd say hello, sometimes he wouldn't. He'd go over and talk to Harry, his brother, and then he'd shuffle back out. Later on, many years later, we were having a get-together. I don't remember if it was his birthday and we threw a party. I'm not sure what it was, but just in conversation, Max broke down in tears. And he told us about being a Holocaust survivor. None of us knew this. And a young lady in the congregation interviewed him and wrote his story. And of course, by now she's grown up, so it turns out to be the old broad's turn. Max Lewin was born in 1918 in the town of Lipnashot, Poland. He had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. His father worked on his farm and in the lumber business. His older brothers, Harry and Honor, moved to the U.S. and Palestine. When Max turned 14, Adolf Hitler, leader of the Nazi Party, became chancellor in Germany. Although less than 1% of the German population was Jewish, the Nazis blamed them for everything. Max earned a degree in electrical engineering. Then on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. The Germans seized control of his hometown in September 1941. The Jews were rounded up and marched to the ghetto Ivy, where Max married Fruma. In January 1942, Germany decided the final solution to the Jewish question was extermination. On May 11, 1942, Max and about 100 other Jews from the ghetto were forced at gunpoint to dig a giant ditch. The next day, all the Jews were ordered out of the ghetto, and there was a selection in which they were ordered to go right, left, or straight. The order straight meant to the ditch, where 7,000 were shot in 3 hours. Later that day, Max and others were forced to bury the dead and the dying. Max was then transferred to one slave labor camp or death camp after another. Warsaw, Bilo, Blotto, Minsk, and Treblinka. At each there was a selection, death or slave labor. At each he lost the remnants of his family till they were all killed in gas chambers. The last was Brother Joseph, not yet 11. Max was then shipped to the following death camps: Auschwitz, Natchweiler, Majdanek, Dachau, Nicaragos. He was liberated on March 4th, 1945, and joined his brother Harry in West Virginia the next year. On every March 10th, he would light a memorial candle for his family. He was silent for 40 years, but he had nightmares. Every night, he dreamt that he was buried alive with his family, and in a sense, he was. He began to speak about his ordeal. In 1994, he made a large donation to what is now WVU Tech, which built a handicapped accessible elevator housed in what became the Lewin family bell tower. Max lived modestly and left his large estate to charity. In conclusion, man is capable of unspeakable cruelty, but we must speak about it. It is important to remember Max Lewin, his family, and the Holocaust, not in order to hate, but in order to see where hatred can lead. It is important to remember the Holocaust despite those who have chosen to deny it. We must try to understand how it happened in the hope that we can prevent it from happening again. At Max Lewin's funeral in 2002, Rabbi Urecki spoke of the patriarchs, how Abraham, after he lost his wife Sarah, rose up, and how Jacob, freed from slavery, came to the city in peace. He said that Max Lewin rose up and came to the city in peace. Rabbi Urecki spoke about the triumph of spirit and about how Max Lewin, after the loss of his family, rose up and after being freed from slavery, came to the city in peace. He said that Max Lewin lived to remember, but also remembered to live. Such things are said at funerals. Max Lewin rose up, but he was broken. He came to the city in peace, but he was never completely at peace. Time did not heal Max Lewin's wounds. His greatest gift was not his generosity to his community or even his trademark gentle smile, but that after 40 years, he unwrapped his bandages and painfully told in tears another generation what it had to hear. Max Lewin had many fears, but his greatest was that the Holocaust would be forgotten and that its lessons would not be learned. He could not help but remember the horror, but feared that others would someday forget. Max Lewin's parents, wife, brother, 3 sisters, 6 aunts and uncles were killed. 6 million Jews were killed. 1/4 of them were children. They died one by one. Max Lewin was one of the survivors, but no one completely survived the Holocaust, and he was no exception. His family members that we remember today his parents, Kechel and Sarah, his wife, Fruma, his brothers, Honor, Joseph. Harry was here. Max ended up here. His sisters, Leah, Hannah, and Kaya. May they all rest in peace and be remembered forever.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam. Again, for us here in Beckley, Max personifying the survivors, but also represent those who died. On the picture here is also Dana Careth, who was a survivor who lived in Athens. And we recognize them as, you might say, representatives of that period and that tragedy among us in our communities. First slide, please. The term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin in 1944 in his book about the Holocaust. Genocide is the intended, deliberate killing of a defined group of people from national, ethnic, religious, or social classes with the goal of destroying that group or nation. Genocide requires or grows out of preceding conditions, attitudes, and societal power dynamics. Those who are in a position of power may rely on prejudices toward a particular group of the population in order to keep their power. These prejudices are nurtured within the society. Through further measures such as propaganda, the stage is set for persecution of the victim group. Escalation of this persecution often eventually leads to genocidal policies and actions. I will be discussing the attitudes and conditions that lead to persecution, what I call seeds, and how the slippery and destructive slope of events leads to the horrific occurrence of genocide. I will also mention some of the tools or measures that are applied to perpetrating genocide. Next slide. Separating people into categories of them and us is often the beginning of persecutory attitudes and actions. Separating people in this way relies on concentrating on differences rather than similarities. Emphasizing differences of customs, racial characteristics, religion, beliefs of social class leads to individual and group attitudes and beliefs that one group is better than the other. This in turn leads to stereotyping and scapegoating, dehumanizing the members of the victim group. Based on preconceived ideas, stereotyping assigns personality, behavioral, and cultural traits to every member of a group, no matter how accurate they may be. Next slide. And fear of outside groups is prominent in the power structure within society. Xenophobia, or fear of others or outsiders, can lead to discriminatory and sometimes violent acts. Leaders of the dominant group stoke xenophobic fears to influence their own members to follow these leaders. Next slide. In contrast, is a set of attitudes which we hope is in society, but often we are disappointed that it is not. It is a set of attitudes that promotes recognition of shared common humanity, that all people want to live safely, to provide for their families, to love without reprisals, to become educated, and contribute to the well-being of the communities and societies. When we recognize this, we all contribute to each other's well-being. However, when a group feels insecure of their own status in society, this insecurity and attitudes are susceptible to prejudicial, preconceived notions about other groups in that society. Next slide. Xenophobia is often focused on scapegoating other groups, blaming these outsiders for problems perceived by the dominant group. During the Black Plague in Europe, also known as the Bubonic Plague, in the years 1347 to 1351, it was caused by infected fleas, where residents of various towns attacked and killed Jews, claiming that they were poisoning community wells that was causing the plague. This is an example of scapegoating. In contemporary society, we see scapegoating and xenophobia in the current opioid epidemic. Foreigners from countries where drug cartels exist are scapegoated as if they were personally responsible for the existence of drug problems. Another example is the blame placed on Asian Americans for the occurrence of the COVID pandemic. Next slide. This is a depiction of the biblical scapegoat. Next slide. Once prejudice develops and determines the relationship between groups, then dehumanization evolves, whereby one group denies the common humanity of members of other groups. Racism is a key expression of this, in which one group feels that they are superior to others merely by being a member of that group. The key example today is white supremacy in the United States, and how it prompts its adherents to degrade others in our country. Discrimination feeds on racism and other prejudices that lead to certain segments of society being treated as having less than inherent rights and status as citizens. Jim Crow laws and racist practices in the United States are examples of this. Next slide. No, go back one, please. There. As too often in the history of nations around the world, dominant groups covet land or belongings to a victimized group. Such was the case of the forced displacement of approximately 100,000 Native American tribal members from the southern United States in the 1830s. The Native tribes had prime agricultural land. Also, gold had been discovered in Georgia. President Andrew Jackson initiated the expulsion of the Native peoples and supported this effort by state government officials. This became the infamous Trail of Tears. Next slide. There we go. The Trail of Tears, in which approximately 15,000 Indians died from starvation and disease on this journey. In the West Bank of Palestine, approximately 300,000 Israelis of the extremist settler movement have appropriated approximately 40% of the land belonging to Palestinians. Reference to victimized people as vermin, animals, insects, and plague-ridden individuals, either verbally or in pictorial depictions, is intended to dehumanize those victim groups. Go back to the previous slide, please. Viktor Orban, Prime Minister in Hungary, has voiced such words and comments toward non-native immigrants into Hungary. Propaganda, as often encouraged by governments, reinforces prejudice and propagates false accusations and claims against groups within their own country. In essence, dehumanization of victim groups encourages lack of remorse or responsibility among those who engage in attacks and discrimination against the victimized groups. 2 slides further down. Hate groups take up the call to attack victimized groups, often citing propagandistic and dehumanizing rhetoric. Many hate groups physically attack members of other groups, such as the action of the Ku Klux Klan in the United States from the last half of the 19th century well into the waning years of the 20th century. In various countries at various times, these hate groups form into unofficial militias that are accepted by government leaders. Next slide. Examples include the Cossacks, who roamed through Ukraine in the 19th century, destroying Jewish villages and murdering their inhabitants. Violent militias during the onset of the Rwanda genocide in the 1980s. In the Bosnian genocide In the 1990s, Serbian militia groups murdered their Muslim neighbors and residents in Serbian-controlled towns. At the beginning of World War II, Nazi-sympathetic Reagan militias roamed through countries, summarily killing Jewish families. I suspect this is what happened to cousins of my grandfather, who were living and then died in Lithuania. Next slide. As prejudice ramps up into propaganda and discrimination, it evolves into more formal persecution of others. Imposition of repressive conditions become a tool for control, enforced relocations, or closures in ghettos. Limited areas of residence or in concentration camps become standard scenarios, often next steps of genocidal measures of extermination. During the Nazi Holocaust, forced relocation of Jews in ghettos preceded the establishment of extermination camps such as Auschwitz. As we speak today, the People's Republic of China forced members of a wider ethnic minority into re-education camps. Next slide, please. Where it is alleged many are tortured and killed. Perpetrators adhere to their belief that their victims are not fully human and do not deserve humane treatment, thereby the perpetrators claim to excuse the murderous actions. Next slide. Starvation of victim populations frequently goes hand in hand with more direct methods of killing. Starvation is a low-tech, low-resource way of killing off victim populations. It's been used in various theories of genocide. Examples in which starvation becomes a tool to subjugate victimized populations include the previous mentioned Trail of Tears, the starvation conditions forced on Armenians by the Turks in 1915, the mass famine of the Holodomor in Ukraine that was engineered by Stalin and Soviet officials, and oftentimes conditions of war, torn areas in which food resupply is embargoed. This slide is taken from Gregory Stanton's 1996 and 1912 Stages of Genocide. He is the president of Genocide Watch, an NGO dedicated to investigation of genocide. He outlines 10 stages described here with preventive measures that can also be applied. My discussion of the seeds of persecution and genocide mirrors much of what he has outlined. As you can see, first of all, classification is comparable to them and us. Civilization and discrimination are with persecution, with prejudice, and strict scapegoating. Dehumanization follows. Oftentimes those persecuting form into formal or informal organizations that further polarizes society. And oftentimes, where there's been genocide, there's been preparations made to engage in extermination. Denial by those who perpetrate genocide is often based on the rationale that comes from the whole process. There are many people prosecuted after World War II who claimed denial of what they did or denial of the importance of what they did. My discussion is so far focused on various attitudes, practices of dehumanization, and actual occurrences of persecution and genocide. However, there is a component in these circumstances that involves others who are not directly engaged in these practices. Next slide. Bystanders' indifference is the lack of action or protest by either those who directly witness persecution within a particular community or country, or those of us in other countries who observe persecution and killings. For myself, partly because I do this, I don't want to be an indifferent bystander. That is one of my personal motivations for having this program. Indifference to the harm being done to others and not objecting allows perpetrators to proceed unchecked. Uprooting the shoots that arise from the seeds of persecution and seeds of genocide requires that each of us become aware of our own biases and prejudices, and from this awareness, hopefully take corrective attitudes and actions. I believe, unfortunately, that there are no individuals, groups, religious organizations, or religions, nations, or classes of people that are immune to succumbing to engaging in acts of persecution that can potentially evolve into genocide. I do not wish to ignore the current war between the Israeli government and Hamas in Gaza. It is right to condemn Hamas for its barbaric and vicious attacks of October 7th against Israeli civilians, as well as their stated intention to drive Israeli Jews out of the country. Hamas has been known for their authoritarian control of Gaza and by their terrorist actions in the past. They are known for using civilians as human shields. But it is also appropriate to condemn the current Israeli government for not providing food, medical services, and other humanitarian aid to Gazan civilians. This is a government that has many extremists in leadership roles who promote the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. Until there was pressure from international sources, including the United States, the Israeli government and defense forces did not seem concerned about the high death toll among Palestinian civilians. This is a war in which there are many innocent civilian victims on both sides. By using starvation, preventing medical assistance and humanitarian aid to Gazan civilians, the Israeli government is culpable to charges of persecution and the intent to create more harm to innocent Palestinians. Both Hamas and extremist Israelis demonstrate the intent to eliminate the other, which creates an intolerable situation no matter how you look at it. As much as we should never forget the Nazi Holocaust, we should take additional lessons from history and acknowledge how often and widespread genocides have occurred. This other plaque here just lists certain ones of those genocides that have occurred both before and after the Nazi Holocaust. And unfortunately, these are the more prominent ones that have been listed in history, but there are others as well. Jews from whichever nation we are citizens of, we believe that we need to deal with and hopefully prevent genocides in the future. Unfortunately, never again, which was a slogan after the Nazi Holocaust, became meaningless. But the slogan now is never forget, because never forget hopefully leads to us in educating ourselves and our communities and doing what we can. Recognize this genocide, as well as genocides which preceded and followed the Holocaust, cause us to recognize where we have failed to take action against discrimination, persecution, and genocide. We observe Holocaust Remembrance Day each year in order to remember those who died in the Nazi Holocaust and remind us of the need to be vigilant in our efforts to recognize and do all we can to eliminate seeds of persecution and genocide wherever we see it in the world. That'll be the end of the slide presentation. There have been certain measures taken by the UN and other national groups to place declarations of rights, to have UN genocide prevention and responsibility to protect, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, and the International Criminal Court. But all of these mostly are reactive measures that can be done long after the genocides have been perpetrated. They are a beginning, but there's much more that needs to be done, and much more that we need to be vigilant about. So I hope that everyone here takes to heart to learn about what happens in other places, and what happens at home, so that we can stand up and call out persecution, stereotyping, scapegoating, where those seeds may start to come up in our society. So hopefully that we can prevent tragedies that go on from hate groups that come out of this or into worse conditions in our own country and in others. So if people have some comments or questions, we'll take a few minutes that you can ask, and then we go on with the rest of the program. Benny? Stand up, please, so we can hear.
Hi, I'm Benny. I live here in Beckley. First, I just want to thank everyone for being here. And Joe, I want to thank you for tying this big picture together. I know for me, something that is sometimes hard in Holocaust commemorations is where people focus on so much on a singular horrific event that deserves remembering. But I think it's really important to remember what it represents in the broad picture of history in the world we're still living in. I just want to share a little from my family history that I think demonstrates that. All of my grandparents were Jews from Eastern Europe. They all came well before the Holocaust, and sometimes I tell people that and they say, "Oh, you're lucky," which is true in a way, but that doesn't mean that they were safe. I did have one of my great-grandparents was killed in a pogrom, and that was why there was a mass wave of migration in the early 20th century, because there was a big wave of pogroms and people being attacked and killed. So, there was one family that the kids were saved by running away to the woods, which is part of the reason I like being in a city surrounded by the woods. And I had other great-grandparents who ran away because they said something bad about the Tsar and were afraid of being killed. So that's in the background of my family history. But there's also things that are ongoing today. All these trends keep going. So the synagogue that I grew up going to for Rosh Hashanah was in my mom's hometown in Pittsburgh, and it's the synagogue where there was an attack a few years ago. I'll be playing the shofar a little bit at the end of this, and I just want to dedicate that to Jerry Rabinowitz, who was one of the people killed, and he was the person who blew the shofar on Rosh Hashanah that I grew up going to. Last, I just want to say, I recently rediscovered, I had cousins in Ukraine who are still there. The great-grandfather survived the Holocaust, but he was conscripted in the Red Army, which was not an easy way to survive by any means. And now his grandson just got drafted to the Ukrainian army. So, I really want to applaud Joe and commend everyone here for taking time to think about the ways all these things are connected, past, present, ongoing.
Thank you. The next speaker will be participant, Sam Petzong, is going to read a sort of a poem of sorts called "Unto Every Person There's a Name." One of the things we recognize about Max Lewin is that his is a name that we all got to know, but knowing that there are names to everybody else who survived or died in the Nazi Holocaust, as well as in all other genocides.
The reading that I have is presented here both in Hebrew and English. I'm not going to read it all in Hebrew, but the theme is, as the title of this piece, "Unto every person there is a name." In Hebrew is the whole Ish Yesh Shem. Unto every person there is a name, bestowed upon him by God, and given him by his father and mother. Unto every person there is a name, accorded him by his stature in the manner of his smile, and given him by the style of his dress. Unto every person there is a name, conferred upon him or her by the mountains, and given to him or her by neighbors. Unto every person there is a name, assigned them by their sins, and given them by their yearnings. Unto every person there is a name, given them by their enemies, given them by their love. Unto every person there is a name, derived from their festivals, and given them by their labor. Unto every person there is a name, presented to them by the seasons, and given by their own blindness. Unto every person there is a name, bestowed upon them by the sea, and given to them in the end by their death.
We're going to change the schedule a little bit. Robin Durrett and Kim Gazelle are going to come up and light Remembrance candles. The first candle commemorates commemorates Max Lewin and all those who died in the Nazi Holocaust, the 6 million Jews and the 5 million non-Jews who died in concentration camps. The second candle commemorates the millions of others who died in previous genocides that followed the Nazi Holocaust, as many listed in this poster here. So we recognize all of them who have perished in the past, from man to humanity to man. Next, Betty's going to come up. What do you bring your chauffeur? And do a short reading from Reverend Niemeyer, who was a Lutheran minister in Germany, who was imprisoned in Dachau. But his message is of what preceded that.
First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
Rabbi Sofian is going to come back and lead us in the saying of the Kaddish. The Kaddish is the Jewish prayer for the dead. But basically it's a praise of God, but it recognizes in the sorrow we praise God, and that this is a standard, one of the most solemn prayers. And I would ask that people to please stand. It is in your handout, you can follow along. We'll do it in Hebrew first, but then we'll also do it in English.
This particular version of the Kaddish was produced by Elie Wiesel, perhaps the most famous of all the Holocaust survivors and writers about the Holocaust, in which he includes the key elements from the Holocaust, meaning the concentration and death camps. Yitgadal Auschwitz, Yitkadash Lo, Shemei Rabbah Ona, Ba'alma Dechol Chirutei Babi Yom, V'yamlik Malutei Madanik, V'chayethon U'yomethon Birkanah, V'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael Kolovra, V'hagala V'zman Kariv Yakamska, V'yimru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabba Mevarach Le'alam U'almei Amaya. Yitbarach V'yishtabach Teresenstadt. V'yitpa'ar V'yitraman Buchenram.
ויתנשא ויתהדר שבלינקה, ויתעלה ויתעלל ויחס. שמי דקודשה בריחו ברגנדסן. לעילה מאתזן. מן כל ברכתה ושירתה דחה. תושבחתה ונחמתה נינס דאמירן בעלמה ורסה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. May the one who makes peace in his high places make peace for us, for the whole household of Israel, and for all of humankind, as we say, amen. We'll be concluding this with the priestly blessing that many of you probably know the English of, but it comes out of Exodus. And it will be followed by the blowing the shofar, which is a horn used to alert people in ancient days as well as today to say, be aware, take heed, listen, take action. Through God speaking to Moses, Moses tells his older brother Aaron to bless the people in these following words. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May the light of God's face shine upon you, and may God only be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's face be lifted up to you and to yours, and may God grant you the most precious of all of the gifts that can be granted, the gift of peace. Amen. Tekiah Gedolah, the big blast. Thank you all for being here. This concludes our ceremony and program. Each year we have this program, and each year there's a different topic of the main speech. But I'm glad that you're all here, and I hope that my words have resonance within you. Thank you all for being here.